As a child, my grandparents took me and my sister annually to the zoo. We were mesmerized by the creatures that we saw there. We saw tigers that paced in front of the glass, bears that would dance for food, and even panthers that would hide in their enclosures. It wasn't until later in life that I realized that these memories I have of being at the zoo with my grandparents is not the reality of zoos and keeping wild animals in captivity. I gained information on this subject through documentaries such as Blackfish and actually just research. I've written a few papers on the subject, and I've realized that we shouldn't keep wild animals in captivity. But a lot of people do have these loving memories of going to the zoos and other attractions with their families and seeing animals in captivity. And they can't look past these memories to see the truth. And with these memories blinding people, I thought it was a good idea to persuade you as to why we should not support keeping wild animals in captivity. We'll talk about the living conditions of these animals that are kept in captivity, the health effects that captivity has on these animals, and the animals' abilities to return into the wild. To begin, we will discuss the living conditions of these animals. The living conditions are, at best, subpar. Rob Laidlaw says that less than 10% of these enclosures meet the standard living requirements of these animals. And Liz Tyson, director of Captive Animals Protection Society, says enclosures are never a suitable substitute for these animals' natural habitats. Another thing that makes life in living conditions in these enclosures subpar is the fact that the people taking care of these animals don't know what's best for them. Lori Bulgaria tells us the story of Jumbo the elephant. Jumbo the elephant was an elephant on the circus route, and his dietary needs were not met by his caretakers. Elephants need to eat roots to grind down the molars in their mouth, or they will become impacted. These impacted molars cause the animals lots of pain, and this leads to extreme aggression from the animals. It wasn't until years later, after Jumbo had died in the circus, that we found out that that is why he was being so aggressive towards people, and not the fact that he was a wild animal. Because a lot of people who are taking care of these animals don't know their basic needs and basic living requirements, that is one amazing reason we should not keep them in captivity. Going from living conditions to health problems that can happen due to captivity, we talk about the fact that captivity actually causes animals a lot of mental health problems. Animals' minds work a lot like humans in the fact that if they're isolated and bored all the time, it will lead to insanity. Micah Issett discusses that the trauma from this, keeping animals in captivity, can even lead to aggression and killing of their caretakers. This is seen in the orcas at SeaWorld, especially Tilikum, who killed 2 of his caretakers during his lifetime of being moved around in captivity. Tilikum is sadly dead now, due to the trauma and life he lived in captivity. He died at a very young age. We also see activities done by animals that we do not observe in the wild at all, especially with big cats. In big cats, we see an over-grooming due to lack of stimulation in their environment. Over-grooming of these animals can cause their skin to become very irritated and their fur to become very patchy. Another thing that we see is the fact that they pace. Like I mentioned in my story, the lion pacing in front of the glass. This is due to their lack and inability to follow their natural migration patterns. This is something that is instinctive to them, and they feel the need to do it, and we deny them that. Finally, we will talk about trying to release them back into the wild. Now, living in captivity pretty much diminishes an animal's ability to survive in the wild. Herding animals, for instance, when returned to the wild, either risk being rejected from the herd, or if they were born in captivity, lack even the basic herding skills due to being around hardly any of their own kind. Carnivores who are born in captivity mainly don't know how to hunt. They're pretty much fed for all of their lives and don't have this basic skill. Rob Laidlaw says that captivity gives wild populations nothing but small numbers and animals that are ill-prepared for the wild. Most animals that are born in captivity will end up dying if they're released into the wild within weeks. Finally, we will discuss some of the other views on this. Some people believe that animals should be kept in captivity sometimes. They believe that if it's for a cause of curing plagues among animals or studying more about these animals, that it's fine to keep them in captivity, but this is extremely wrong and extremely uninformed. While they have good intentions, their reasoning is very wrong. Any research conducted on animals in captivity is completely invalid. Unless it is observed in a wild setting, you cannot use that research to say that that is affirmative, that is what those animals do in the wild. And that is according to Bertie Smith. Another thing, curing things and learning more about animals does not dismiss the abuse that these animals will encounter during captivity. Ultimately, humans pride themselves gods over the earth and the animals that live here, but are actually just titans that destroy and kill creatures. And honestly, nothing gives us that power. Through knowing the living conditions and the health effects and their ability to return to the wild, I believe it shows why we should not hold these creatures in captivity, why it is extremely wrong. However, there are hope for these creatures yet. Inhumane breeding programs such as the one at SeaWorld has been shut down for over a year now. And terrible facilities are being exposed more and more as this cause gains grounds. And organizations like the WWF and Wildlife Conservation Society is making it harder for animals to be taken from their homes in the wild to begin with. With supporters grabbing their badges and signs and protesting this activity, I believe we will live in a world where we can see animals living how they're supposed to, free.